Mayors of 3 of the country's biggest cities now say their areas are almost at capacity for handling the surge of migrants currently pouring over the U.S.-Mexico border. The mayors of New York City, Denver, and Chicago have all pleaded with federal authorities for assistance as the border sees a record number of crossings. Just yesterday, Mexico and the Biden administration formally agreed to work together to keep the border open for asylum seekers while curbing illegal migration.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams shared this video to address constituents on the matter just yesterday. Let's watch.
We're seeing the erosion of the quality of life that we've improved on in such a short period of time of this administration. And we have been impacted. For many months, we were able to keep the visualization of this crisis from hitting our streets, but we have reached a breaking point. We're no longer able to do that because of the volume in numbers. Just last week, we had 3,900 people that arrived here. We are averaging anywhere from 2,500 to close to 4,000 a week. And if you do the math, you see that's 8,000 every 2 weeks, potentially 16,000 a month that we must feed, clothe, house, educate children, and all the services that you would give a normal adult. And we're seeing that play out on our streets of New York. And that is what the breaking point looks like, what we are experiencing right now.
The Biden administration, meanwhile, warned Texas that it will sue the state if it implements a strict immigration law that would empower state and local law enforcement to arrest, jail, and prosecute migrants suspected of crossing illegally. So Mayor Eric Adams just had this executive order passed to essentially tell the state of Texas, you have to give us 32 hours notice and you can't have buses of migrants coming into the state, any hours outside of 8 a.m. and 12 noon so that, they can process them. Seems like a reasonable executive order, seems like good cooperation between states. But all in all, this isn't an issue that can be resolved by the governor of any particular state, by any mayors, by law enforcement. This is something that needs to be resolved by Congress, because I see migration wholly as an economic consideration. There needs to be the proper, policies in place and systems in place to process people coming into the United States legally who want to work here. And there really isn't one. When I see the influx of migrants into New York City and New York officials saying, we have to pay for 19,300 plane tickets for migrants seeking to go across the country, are we sure that there is a job for them there? Are we sure that there is a pathway for them to live a sustainable life? Or are they going to be sucked into what I think many conservatives fear, and which is a legitimate fear, the informal economy, and seeking to meet their most basic needs through committing crimes and doing all kinds of work on the streets of the United States? We can have full employment in the United States. This is a failure of Federal Reserve policy. It's a failure of the administration and of Congress. We have things that need to get done. We have a shortage of childcare. We have a shortage of elder care. We have shortages in the healthcare industry. We have a need to rebuild our infrastructure. There is work for many people to do in the United States, and there are unnecessary restrictions, not freeing capital to go towards those things. All the while, the banks, which are responsible for allocating, new dollars to be spent into the economy, to invest into businesses, whether existing or people are starting new ones, instead of using capital in that way, in a way that grows the economy in the same way putting immigrant labor to work would, instead what those banks are doing is taking advantage of the Bank Term Funding Program. They are borrowing money from the Federal Reserve at a 4.88% interest rate, and then depositing that money into accounts at the Federal Reserve at a 5.4% interest rate. The Federal Reserve is currently paying banks to take money to the tune of $255 billion in the 2 weeks we just had in December. That's absurd. Banks in the United States should be investing in businesses. They should be loaning that money out so that our economy grows. And right now, every single person that's struggling with inflation is a victim of banks irresponsibly using their power. They've been tasked with money creation. They've been doing a bad job. Everyone hurts from that. All of the workers that are struggling to make ends meet are struggling because of that. And the migrants seeking to labor in the United States and start a life. And now, governors and mayors are overwhelmed with the amount of migrants they don't have jobs for.
Yeah, I think border security should be the first consideration, because at that point, it would be a lot easier, first of all, to process the people who are coming to the United States who right now are not being properly screened and somehow are being put on airplanes and other forms of transportation to move about the country on the expense of taxpayers, despite the fact that we seemingly don't have much idea of who these people are. There have been multiple instances in the dozens of people on terror watch lists actually making their way across the southern border. And we have people not just coming from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, but people who actually fly into Central and South America, as well as the northern border that we share with Canada, in order to cross there because they believe it would be easier than trying to enter the country through legal means or through some other method. So border security to me is number one. There are obviously legal pathways already for people to be able to work in the United States, whether seasonally or on some kind of other visa program. Some of my coworkers do it from London. I work for The Spectator. We are fundamentally a British company, and they all get work permits to come work here. But trying to give people after the fact work permits after they've immigrated illegally only serves to further incentivize that behavior, as opposed to encouraging people to go through the legal process. I think there's an argument to be made, perhaps, that the legal process can be challenging sometimes and take too long. That's legitimate criticism. That is something that obviously would have to go through Congress as well. But I think there's always been this attempt at deal making between Republicans and Democrats, where Democrats say, well, we'll give you border security, but first you have to give everyone who's here amnesty and you have to reform the immigration system. And they've been hoodwinked because the Democrats don't want to do border security. So the idea that they wouldn't secure the border first, I think it's frankly ridiculous. And if you start giving work permits to tens of thousands of migrants, really we've had millions come in over the past few years, what you're doing for the American worker is you're artificially deflating wages, because these individuals tend to be more economically desperate. So they are willing to work for lower wages and for poorer working conditions, even if they are a part of the legal economy. So we also have to consider the ramifications of importing that many laborers into our economy would have on the American working and middle class.
Yeah, I think, keeping the federal minimum wage high is a good stopgap for that. Having the Federal Reserve, consistently have a population of people unemployed is really the policy that's kept wages low for so long, since the 70s, when we saw wages begin to stagnate. That's also when they adopted the non-accelerationary inflationary rate of unemployment. So they decided that at this magical figure that they don't have any real math or economics to back up, no data that shows this figure is absolutely what it should be. Jerome Powell has admitted this on the floor of the House. But they decide, not more than 4.5% should be, unemployed. If more than this is unemployed, it's unnecessary. But if we have, unemployment numbers too low, we're going to see inflation skyrocket, which is ridiculous. That's absolutely not how it works. If more people are working, they're producing more. There's more things for people to buy, who are then earning money in their jobs and then going on to purchase things. This concern that if more people are working, demand will be uncontrollable is ridiculous. And we haven't really seen this figure stand the test of time. We've seen Jerome Powell say, you know what, we've actually gotten this figure wrong, which means that there's a population of people unnecessarily unemployed, people desperate for work, who are willing to, like you said, like many migrants, take jobs at incredibly low wages. It is true that many migrants are willing to work for less, but we also have this case of workers intentionally made desperate by American policy that is keeping wages low. And since the 1970s, we've seen inflation-adjusted wages be stagnant while profits are incredibly high. They can afford to pay workers more, but they're choosing not to, and they don't have to thanks to this policy. So there's all kinds of reasons why wages are low, but I think I want to go back to the fear around border security. So many Democrats don't want to talk about border security, and there's an idea that all border security means is militarizing the border, when really that's what they're going to do in Texas. That's what the governor's going to do in Texas. That's what they're trying to do with this law. The alternative to having the folks in Texas do that is to actually invest public dollars. They control the budget into having processing centers for migrants coming to the United States. That would make the process much faster. That would prevent border security or border patrol from putting people into facilities where they wait for a long period of time. But Democrats don't want to acknowledge that the solution is actually to invest more in the border, because they have this unconceived notion that for some reason that means increased militarization. No, we need the legal process to be one that can be done quickly, which means we need more buildings created there and we need more personnel allocated to the border. And there's no really good reason why Democrats aren't writing legislation to do that.
I think they would be reticent to do that because if you process people more quickly, you also lead to more rapid deportation or removals, expedited removal, because a lot of these people who are coming are not eligible for the asylum that they're claiming. So if you speed up the court processes, you end up basically just having to send these people back. And I think what the Democrats want is for them to come in without processing so that they can already be in the country and not have to worry about a court date. But we probably have to agree to disagree on that one. We'll be back with more Rising after this.